Hi, and welcome to the show where we share the stories of the many who intersect with our healthcare system but are rarely heard from. My name is Kevin Poe, founder and editor of Kevin MD. Today on the show, we have Toba Bolaji. He's a surgery resident and he wrote the Kevin MD article, The Day My Patient Called Me the N-Word. Toba, welcome to the show.
Awesome. Thank you. Happy to be here.
So we'll get into your article in a little bit, but first off, can you share your story and journey to where you are today?
Definitely. Yes, my name is Toba Bolaji. I am a current PGY3 resident based in Wilmington, Delaware, Newark, Delaware as well. And, I was born in Nigeria, but I call home Toronto and lived there, grew up there, and then came to the States for school. Was first in Pittsburgh, then Philadelphia for med school, and now in Delaware. So it's been a cool journey. Many amazing people have kind of made great impressions on me and kind of pushed me in the direction of where I am now. So I'm definitely appreciative.
So over the last year of the pandemic, of course, it's affected pretty much every facet of the medical system. So talk about how the pandemic in general has affected your surgery training.
Yeah, it's been interesting. I mean, in the first months of the pandemic, we were trying to figure out, as an institution, how to allocate resources and tailor the hospital environment to what was going on. We saw at Christiana a lot of changes. So, for one, as a surgery resident, there was a national standstill with elective cases, and so our volume went down pretty significantly. And so that actually meant some time off for us. The traditional 80-hour weeks went down to much less than that, over a period of probably 1 to 2 months. And since then, we've had to pivot, as it relates to meetings and, our education time. And then obviously the time outside of the hospital has also changed. So, honing in on how we deal with our stresses and how we kind of find wellness, we've had to kind of pivot in that direction too, I would imagine.
So one of the articles that was written on my site, I think a few years ago, was talking about the decreasing number of training hours one has in a hospital. And of course, that's of course compounded by the pandemic. Now, you obviously have been in surgery training for the last couple of years. Now, is there a concern about the fewer procedures that residents in general are doing?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. And I think that answer probably varies depending on where you train. You know, I guess I can think about, I consider where I train currently, and I think we're fortunate in the sense where we aren't really concerned about volume as much, and so our numbers by the end of our training seem to do well in comparison to the best in the country, and so we don't have that concern much. I think as a general medical field and surgical field, the way we manage patients these days are more and more less invasive,
Mhm.
and more and more non-operative. So, but I think that just comes down to technology, and so we have to find a way to be able to how do we integrate technology into what we do, and sometimes it's not necessarily learning less procedures, but different approaches to procedures. Robotic surgery and laparoscopic surgery are kind of, in some aspects have become the standard of care in many, traditional procedures. So I think it's about pivoting and knowing, how to, still keep up my skills or learn new
Mhm.
skills, given the times.
All right, so let's transition now into the Kevin MD article that you wrote. It was written back in March. It's titled "The Day My Patient Called Me the N-Word." Now, for
Mm.
those who didn't read the article, can you just walk my audience through it and share the story of why you decided to write it?
So the article starts off with, a story, an anecdote about an experience I had with a patient, and the event actually happened about a little over a year ago, this time last year, in the middle of some of the social issues that had been going on around us. And I had this experience, and it really, and you'll see in the article, it pivots and it takes off to how this experience kind of propagated a cascade of thinking through how us as a medical community think through, or really don't think through and discuss some of these social type issues. And so the point of the article is to say, hey, this thing happened to me, and you know, it wasn't really the I didn't feel victimized, and I didn't feel victimized. I remember, I just recall the feelings that I have. I didn't really feel victimized. I didn't feel like anyone needed to avenge my honor. I didn't feel like that patient necessarily needed to be reprimanded or anything. But what I did feel is this kind of timidity or timidness when it came to telling people, because I didn't know how people would feel about it, and I didn't know what kinds of discussions that would raise. And so, I say that I was nervous that if I told them, my closest colleagues, their silence on the matter that I, in some ways, could have predicted would probably have been more hurtful than the event itself.
For those who didn't read the article, can you just give the general scenario of what happened with that patient, and what happened to you after? You mentioned there was a little bit of timidity, but share what did you do after that event?
So the story is one where taking care of a patient, and we round in the patient in the morning, and usually on post-op day 2 we take off the surgical dressing, and as anybody knows who's ever had surgery, sometimes even taking off the tape can be really painful, So as I do with all my patients, I ask if it's okay to take it off. I use like a little rubbing alcohol to kind of make it, come off more gentler. And this patient, obviously aggravated by taking off of the tape, in a moment of frustration, he kind of yells the N-word at me. And in the moment I froze, because I never really thought that could happen or would happen at work, where someone saw me as the physician, a kind of a situation where I'm providing care for them. How could they kind of, almost demean me in a way, given that kind of relationship or rapport that we would have. And so the article then transforms into this idea where, what do I do now? I don't necessarily feel like, my honor needs to be avenged by this, but I think people need to understand this is an experience that, minorities in this field go through, that often add to, not feeling like they belong or having imposter syndrome and things like that. And so the article really the lesson in the article comes down to the fact where, I struggled with, this is something I can talk about, because if I went to my program director, if I went to my fellow residents, if I went to attendings, I was nervous that many people would just maybe not really know what to say, or not say anything at all, or even say the wrong thing, or whatever it may be. And that apathy that may come off of it, would be more hurtful to me. And so the charge at the end is, telling medical professionals, like, we have hard conversations all day. That's part of our training. We have no issues talking to patients about, difficult diagnoses and plans of care, but what oftentimes is just silence around these types of issues. And it really doesn't make sense. We can't really talk about the general wellness of people without kind of addressing some of these, inequities. And I think it's kind of hypocritical, essentially, to kind of be silent about it.
Tell me what would have been a constructive response had you gone to talk to an attending. What are some points that that attending could have brought up, perhaps in a constructive way to address it? So what would be your suggestions?
That's a good question, because often a lot of people, and it's good, this article has kind of created a lot of good conversation as a product of it with some of my attendings and fellow colleagues. And the answer, I can't say I'm an expert on the answer, but if I am telling people, I think that one, I would like, there should be a validation of the person's experience, saying that, I'm sorry that, you went through something like that. I think that's key. And then there should also be a validation that, me as the attending, or me as the other person receiving the message, I can't fully know what it feels like to be there, but to be in your shoes, but I'm willing to listen. And is there anything I can do to, change these things? So I think it's a validation of the person's experience. But also within that, you have to come humbly in saying that, hey, I can't I can't fully understand, because I don't look like you, or I don't have the same skin tone as you. I can't fully understand what it feels like, and I'm sorry for that.
In your article, you did a hypothetical response where someone may respond, "This is not a problem that affects me, so why should I care?" What would be your answer to someone who thought that?
Yeah, I think that the problem is it perpetuates a feeling of apathy that makes it feel like it's okay.
Hmm.
Like, I don't think that everybody has to, there's a lot of injustices in the world, and you can't attack everything as one person. You can't attack everything. You pick and choose your battles, and I do think that's okay. But when, especially in the kind of the social zeitgeist that we have, there is a specific call within this time to think about racial inequality, especially in this time that we're in right now. And if that's your response, like, it doesn't affect me, so why should I care? I think it definitely gives off a very dangerous rhetoric, especially in the time. Not to say that you have to be on the front lines of everything and you have to, outwardly fight, but there should be a consciousness to things going on, and I think an intentionality in wanting to understand it more.
In your article, you also bring up the murder of George Floyd. Can you
Mhm.
speak to how that event has affected you as a physician?
Yeah, I think I'm not alone in saying that, these types of things have affected a lot of people who are, a lot of Black Americans and Black people in general who live in this country. I think for me, it brings to question, how close my own mortality potentially could be. You know, I feel like, I think there's a privilege that we all have as physicians, right, in the community. We're generally looked at, in favorable means. People generally have a specific respect, be just by our earned title, good or bad. But at the same time, when I do see these kind of senseless killings that don't really make sense and are very haste and I feel like there's no thought process and definitely not justified. It makes me think, wow, I could be, I could be one of those people. Never did I think that I could be, because I didn't find myself, I didn't see myself in those kinds of situations per se, but it often feels like, does it even matter? Like, kind of just a small traffic stop lead to these kinds of things. I think many of us think about that a lot.
We are talking to Toba Bolaji. He is a surgery resident. He wrote the Kevin MD article, "The Day My Patient Called Me the N-Word." Toba, for those who don't have your lived experience, what are some actionable tips on how we can better ally?
A few things I would say: don't be afraid to ask questions, and when you do, ask humbly. Read, read about the history of these types of things and racial inequalities in general. Things like redlining, things like the downfall of Black Wall Street. I think there's a lot of examples of racial inequalities, especially from a systemic approach that we can call out, and that show that a lot of these issues are ingrained in the infrastructure of this country. And so I think it starts there. I think it's doing the work behind the scenes to know about these things, but then also not being afraid to engage people and to ask questions, because oftentimes your silence and your inability or your lack of courage to ask can often be misconstrued as apathy.
And I guess from an institution standpoint, whether we're talking about academic institutions, hospitals, or medical schools, what are some things that they can do?
I think right now, diversity and inclusion is often is a big buzzword when it comes to institutional kind of infrastructure and how they figure that out. And so a lot of people are starting to figure out what it looks like to be diverse, and I think it's often just defined by the numbers and the fractional percentages of how many Black people do we have, how many Asian people do we have, how many white people, how many Latino. Latinx people do we have? And so, but I think the point that the next stage of that is really inclusion. Now how many people are actually sitting at the table? How many people from diverse backgrounds are actually sitting at the table and actually helping to make the discussion, making these decisions, and helping and those decisions and opinions are actually valued. So, not just about diversity. It's not just about having the numbers, but it's about inclusion too. We have to forget that piece. Keep bringing people to the table.
And my final question, what's your take-home message that you want to leave with the Kevin MD audience?
I mean, I would just, from my article, I think the point is, we need to be, I think, as a healthcare community, I think we need to be one of the institutions and systems that's on the front line of equity, because that's part of what we do. I mean, I may sound naive and ideal and come off more as like an idealist in that sense, but I think it's hypocritical to not engage these things as much as we can.
Toba, thank you so much for sharing your time and insight, and thanks again for being on the show.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.